Today's case is a very interesting yet tragic one where the outcome is dire. What is known is it involves a murder and a death. Or is it 3 murders and a death? Or perhaps even 5 murders and a death? We don't really know for sure because we don't know what actually happened around the time of any of these incidents. This case has so many possibilities and a lot to unpack, so I've asked my friend and fellow podcast host to join me a little later to help discuss this very strange mystery. Let's talk about Diana Robertson and Mike Reimer. Diana Robertson and Mike Reimer were a couple from Puyallup, Washington. Mike was 36 and Diana was 21. The couple had been together for about 4 years, and they had a 2-year-old daughter together named Crystal. Mike was a roofer and also a trapper in the cold weather months and had many traps that he checked almost daily. The family of 3 packed their 1982 red Plymouth Arrow truck and attached their 7-foot dark blue aluminum pram boat on top of it on Thursday morning, December 12, 1985, for a short trip on the Nisqually River. They were there to find and cut down a Christmas tree and to collect animals from the traps that Mike had put out. They had just planned to be gone for the day. When the couple didn't arrive home by that night, family members were concerned. Diana's mother, Louise Conrad, said her daughter would always call her when they got home from their trap tour, but she didn't call that night. Lloyd Reimer, Mike's father, would then report the couple missing. Later that night, technically Friday morning, from 12:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., Louise and Mike's best friend, Steve, too, drove around the roads by the Nisqually River searching for them. Louise would shine a spotlight while Steve would drive down the roads he knew that Reimer traveled. Steve, too, would also make sure that television stations and newspapers were aware of their disappearance and showed pictures of the missing 3. Just a few days later, one of the missing trio would be found, but nothing about the discovery made any sense at all. 3 days after the disappearance, on Sunday, a nurse at the Mary Bridge Children's Medical Center had seen a picture of missing 2-year-old Crystal on the television news. She looked like a little girl who had recently been brought in by a foster parent for treatment of minor scratches and bruises, so she phoned the police. Crystal Robertson had now been found. The circumstances of Crystal's recovery are as baffling as her parents' disappearance. It appears that she was dropped off at a Kmart in nearby Spanaway. She was quiet and seemed in shock, and when asked questions about her parents and how she came to be there, she would only say the chilling comment, "Mommy is in the trees." No one reportedly saw her actually being dropped off, and she was so young she couldn't say who brought her to the store, so this mystery would seemingly only deepen with her discovery. She was happy to see her grandmother, however, when the two were reunited, and Louise Conrad would continue to care for her young granddaughter while the search continued for her missing parents. So now we still had a couple missing, along with their truck, that was last said to be in the woods. Mike's father, Lloyd Reimer, couldn't explain his son's disappearance unless it was foul play. With Lloyd being a retired Washington State game warden, Mike had grown up knowing all about the outdoors, trapping, and survival. He could take care of himself in the woods. He also said that his son carried a .22 pistol, so he should have been able to protect himself and Diana if he needed to. They said that when the traps were checked, usually Diana would stay in the truck with Crystal, so it wasn't thought that both of them would have been on foot in the woods. Normally, on these trips, the family would be back around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. There were several searches, and Mike's father, Lloyd, even made an appeal for the public to come help with the search, and they did, but to no avail. It was a mystery why they didn't return, And even more importantly, where were they now? On February 18, 1986, a discovery was made that would eerily confirm Crystal's statement about her mother. On Tuesday, February 18th, a couple traveling from Morton stopped to let their dog run free. He ran up a logging road and the owners followed after him. When they caught up to him, they saw a sight that horrified them. A partially decomposed body was found lying behind an abandoned pickup truck. This was near Washington 7, 3 miles south of Elbe and Alder Lake, Washington. It was said to be a half a mile off the highway in a heavily forested slope. After being positively identified and just over 2 months after her disappearance, Diana Robertson had finally been found. Crystal's mommy was, in fact, in the trees. Police used shovels, rakes, and even metal detectors to search the snow-covered site for any clues or perhaps the body of Mike Reimer. They had difficulty digging as there was 4 inches of snow, so bloodhounds were brought in as well. The truck, as well as Diana's body, was taken to Chehalis the next day, where they would analyze the truck as well as perform an autopsy on Diana. Lloyd Reimer was relieved to at least have one person and the truck recovered. He said that he and other relatives had driven near the area where Diana's remains were found many times, but they always drove on the west side of Washington 7. To his knowledge, Mike had never set any traps on the east side, so they didn't search there. So Diana was found, but Mike wasn't. Family and law enforcement were baffled at that, but there was also a level of concern. The concern comes from the stormy relationship between the couple. Mike had a history of slashing her tires as well as violence against Diana, and there were a few different incidents when police were called. In fact, less than 2 months before this disappearance, he had been arrested and cited for domestic assault and malicious damage. Diana told police that Mike had kicked down her door at her apartment, threw her to the ground, and rubbed her face in the carpet. There were apparently visible red marks on her nose and left eye to verify her account. After this incident, a judge ordered a no-contact order against Reimer concerning his girlfriend. He also set his trial on the 2 charges to begin on January 22nd. But Mike and Diana would never make it to their court date. On Saturday, March 26, 2011, Phil Reynolds and his neighbor were out near some acreage that Reynolds owned near Mineral, Washington, trying to find his property stakes, when the neighbor saw what he thought was a rock and kicked it. He was surprised upon further inspection that it was actually a skull. Tests would eventually confirm the shocking news that the skull belonged to Mike Reimer, 26 years after he had gone missing. Reynolds said the skull was found just a few hundred yards from where Diana's body had been found decades earlier. Here is a quote from Reynolds from a local newspaper at the time. "It was actually pretty clean being under that cover. I suppose that helped, but like I said, it had a big hole in the side here, in the skull, in the temple, where he got hit pretty hard with something, and no teeth at all, just the upper part. I was amazed." We'll talk about the reason that statement is noteworthy a bit later. They reportedly found about half of Reimer's remains nearby. In a macabre twist, reportedly growing in Reimer's skull through the eyeball was said to be a tree that was growing upward. They cut down the tree, and by looking at the rings on it, they could tell that his body had been there for many years, probably since he went missing. Investigators found some other possible evidence near the remains, but did not disclose what it was. They also found a heavily weathered ID card nearby, but the name on it wasn't visible. So now we have so many possibilities and theories to discuss concerning what could have happened in this case. This was a bizarre enough case, but with the murder of the two other couples, it has seemingly grown tentacles. Is there a possibility any of them could be related? Now I want to introduce my friend Steven Pacheco from the Trace Evidence podcast, which is, by the way, one of my favorite podcasts. Welcome, Steven.
Thanks for having me.
So, Steven, you and I have been planning a collaboration on an episode for months now, so I'm glad to be able to make it happen.
Me too. I don't do a ton of collaborations, so when I get to know somebody who I appreciate their work and what they're doing, I'm generally excited to work with them on something. And I know you and I have thrown a couple of ideas back and forth over the last few months, so I was glad we finally found something that worked out for both of us schedule-wise and then case-wise.
Yes. So tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to research and write a podcast and how long you've been at it.
Sure. I started Trace Evidence in May of 2017, so I've been doing, this year will be 8 years that I've been doing it. For the most part, I've always been a true crime fan. Grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, all that kind of stuff. Been really into it. Always leaned more towards the unsolved stuff. Solved cases are interesting, but it's the unsolved ones that have always grabbed my attention, trying to figure out what happened and why. So, of course, when true crime podcasts started becoming a big thing, I started listening to them. And I listened to a lot of the ones that were big in the early days. And the one thing that I found, generally, after I completed an episode, was I had a lot of questions that weren't answered. And they weren't necessarily questions for which we don't know the answers. They were usually questions of background details or crime scene analysis or something where I felt like, why didn't you tell me this? So I figured I had two different ways I could go about it. I could, go on Apple Podcasts and stuff and leave negative reviews and say, like, you didn't explain this and you didn't explain that. Yeah. Or I could just do my own podcast. So I figured, oh, the hell with it. I'll just do my own podcast.
Oh, that's great. Wow. I feel like you and I are similar in how we go about preparing and writing our podcasts. We are both research nerds and love that part, and both really enjoy the writing part.
Yeah, research is my favorite part of doing Trace Evidence. I mean, Essentially, I've been doing research into unsolved cases for most of my life. I just didn't know that's what it was at the time. Yeah. But whenever I would hear about a case or see it on a show, I'd find myself digging in, trying to find additional information to fill in gaps that whatever I had watched or listened to had left behind. But I really fell in love with researching when I first started Trace Evidence. And man, I thought I knew what I was doing with research when I first started, and it only took a couple of episodes to realize, like, oh, I have to do a hell of a lot more than I've been doing. So it's been a learning experience over 8 years where I've even gotten to a point where I'm tempted to go back and re-record my first 99 episodes because I feel like I've gotten so much better at researching now, I could probably do all of those cases much more justice now. But yeah, researching is my favorite thing about it. I never really wanted to be the face or the name of the podcast. I never wanted to be famous off of it or a celebrity like some podcasters aim to be. I just wanted to tell the stories and get the cases more attention. So if I could find a way to just research and make a living off of that, I would probably do that. But until that happens, I'll be doing Trace Evidence.
Yeah, I look at myself as a storyteller, and of course I want to get these cases more attention. I feel like we both tend to bring some of our own emotions and feelings into these cases outwardly because, I've listened to your podcast where you get angry, and I totally respect that. These cases are tragic and oftentimes infuriating due to the injustice, so it's hard to not, show your anger when you're talking about it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it that impact you emotionally. I can't tell you how many episodes that during the research or during the time where I'm putting the script together where I've gotten emotional about it, whether I just get really angry and have to take a little bit of time away from it or just get really sad or even sometimes cry about it, where it's just there's no way for me to look into crimes such as these, missing persons, murders, Jane and John Does, and everything in between, and not feel some emotional connection to it. And I understand that when it comes to law enforcement, that there's this almost doctor-like mentality of like, well, you have to be emotionally detached. And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. It's part of why I chose not to pursue a career in law enforcement, because I felt like I would be the guy sitting at home at his kitchen table by himself all hours of the night just looking through case files and photos and trying to figure stuff out. But yeah, I get emotionally involved in every case I do, and sometimes that comes through on the audio. Sometimes it's anger or emotion about what happened. Other times it's frustration with how police handled a case or the way a case has been presented over the years. But I think once you dig deep into this stuff, there's really no way to stay emotionally detached from it, especially when you're the one doing the research on it.
Yeah, and I always take like some quiet moments before I would write an article and just put myself there at that situation when they went missing. Like, what do I think happened? And just trying to envision it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's been times I've done a lot of crisscrossing of the country when I've driven to different places. So I've driven to California and back to North Carolina where I live and everything in between. And there's absolutely been times where I've passed through locations where cases I've covered have taken place. And it's kind of hard not to stop along the way and maybe visit a couple of the important places. And when you do, you just feel it so much more. I mean, I've gone on occasion, if it's close enough, to graveyards and cemeteries for victims that I've covered. And it's amazing to me to go and do that and feel the emotion of it. I didn't know this person. I never met them. And yet I'm at their grave feeling the way I feel when I visit the grave of a relative.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so now on to this case. We're going to focus mostly on Mike and Diana, of course. But first, let's talk about Edward and Kim. Do you think this has a connection to Mike and Diana's case?
I see where there are some similarities, but I honestly don't think there is a solid connection between these cases. When it comes to Ed and Kim, their crime scene is more than 100 miles away from the other crime scenes in this case. We know for a fact that Ed was bound with his hands behind his back and his ankles were tied together, and then his throat was slashed, and then his body was dumped into a gravel pit, which to me suggests that whoever did this was attempting to conceal the body, which I don't think occurs in the other cases. I also think in this case, they reported that Ed's wallet was missing and was never recovered. So there's an aspect to it that makes me wonder if maybe robbery was potential motive in this, or maybe just a part of it, which doesn't seem to be the case in the other cases. Also, I mean, when you look at Ed and Kim's case, as you know, they had somebody who they identified from a fingerprint at the crime scene. They were able to track that person down. It was somebody who had committed similar violent crimes but hadn't quite crossed into homicide yet. And that person initially denied any involvement and then entered a guilty plea to get the death penalty off the table. So for me, the only way that you can really connect Ed and Kim to the other cases is if you can connect the killer, Billy Ray Ballard, to the other cases. And I have been unable to do so. There's a lot of debate online about whether or not he was in the state of Washington at the time the other crimes occurred, whereas it also seems like maybe he could have been in the custody of law enforcement at the time that one or the other crime was committed. For whatever reason, the records on that seem really difficult. I don't know how much success you were able to have if you tracked down this alley, but I couldn't find a whole ton about this guy once he went into the system.
Yeah, me too. I think that was more of a crime of opportunity. I mean, they were at a scenic overlook, so it would have been easy to, sneak up on him. They probably weren't paying any attention.
Right. I think the only things this case really has in common with the other ones is that it took place in a rural area, in a wooded area in Washington State. That's about it. I mean, for a series of crimes that are generally referred to as the tube sock killings, there's no tube sock at this crime scene. There's nothing to suggest a real similarity between the methods in which these people were killed. It's almost like saying any time a couple were killed in a wooded area in Washington State, well, then it must be connected. It's too broad for me.
Yeah. So now what are your thoughts about Steven and Ruth and their murder?
I think it's say with any certainty, but it certainly appears to me that the cases have some connection. The first thing that caught my attention was the proximity of the two crime scenes, located in rural areas less than 20 miles apart. More interesting to me, at least when you look at Mike and Diana's case, is their daughter Crystal being found at the Kmart in Spanaway, which is north of both crime scenes, but less than 15 miles from where Steven and Ruth's bodies were recovered.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people like to talk about coincidences, and it would be difficult for me to accept it being a coincidence, because I personally would feel like Spanaway probably plays some role in the killer's life or travel routine. If you take him in Ed's case and you rule that out, that would make Steven and Ruth the first in the series, or at least the first that we know of. A lot of times with killers, they start their crime series in places they're familiar with, areas they've traveled well, and they feel comfortable and safe committing those crimes in. To me, it's not mere coincidence that Spanaway is so closely linked to both cases. Both Steven and Ruth and Mike and Diana lived in and around Tacoma, which is north of Spanaway, and the crime scenes, which suggest to me that the killer probably traveled north after the crimes, perhaps heading back to Tacoma, and in the case at least of Crystal, may have stopped in Spanaway to drop her off. It's also interesting to consider that the killer could be someone linked to the Tacoma area, and while I didn't come across any evidence to prove it, I can't help but wonder if it's possible the killer could have known one or all four of the victims.
Yeah.
Once you move beyond the geographics of it, you got to look at the way the crimes were committed. Steven shot in the head in a sleeping bag while he was presumably asleep. According to law enforcement, Ruth's also killed by a gunshot. She gets hit in the abdomen. She's found about 2 miles from Steven, with her skull having been separated from her body. The skull is found at the end of a dead-end road. Her body's 50 feet away. She has the tube sock tied around her neck, but she wasn't strangled, and I haven't seen any confirmation one way or another about whether they believe that sock was tied on her body before or after she was killed. So you have a couple out in the woods, a double homicide involving a gun, the body separated by more than a mile, and a head severed from the body. I want to know more about that, as in, was the head removed by the killer, or do they think animals scattered the remains in the 2 months between the murder and the discovery of the body? It seems odd to me to tie a sock around someone's neck and then decapitate them. It's also worth noting that according to law enforcement, the socks in both cases were tied with the same knot. We don't have enough solid information about the forensics to get into the weeds about how similar the two crimes were on that level, but considering what else we do know, I find it really hard to imagine that this crime wasn't linked to Mike and Diana's.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Steven and Ruth, I don't really have any clear-cut theories, but I have wondered if Mike Reimer could be responsible for their deaths. I think you can make a good case for him as you know, as anyone else, because he had traps in that area. So he had a reason to be over there. He had a violent past. You know, I don't know whether he would have thought maybe they were getting into his traps because they were camping. And of course, their dog was killed as well. So, I mean, it just crossed my mind as, could Mike be the serial killer that these people are talking about?
There's certainly a possibility there. I wouldn't by any means rule Mike out as perhaps having killed Steven and Ruth. I guess for me it's a matter of, I've never seen anything that conclusively puts him in the area at the time the crime was committed, and in fairness, it doesn't look like investigators really work that hard on trying to link him to the other crimes.
Yeah.
They seem pretty focused on him being responsible for Diana, at least to a point, and then they sort of talk about Steven and Ruth almost in a throwaway. Well, 4 months earlier this happened, so maybe it's the same. It's very strange to me the way it was all handled. I don't think it was investigated all that well on either account. But there are, to me at least, are conclusive links between the crimes, the tube sock being one of them. It would be interesting to know more about Mike himself to try and figure out if there's anything in his past or any of his former girlfriends or anybody he knew who he also might have been abusive to, if he ever tied anything around their necks at any particular point in time.
Yeah, I actually saw a post on, it was Reddit or somewhere, and this guy says, well, I'm married to Mike's first wife's daughter, and my mother-in-law is, a treasure trove of information, which I would love to talk to her to see what she thinks. And I've always thought that the socks were more of a signature. Because neither one of the women died of strangulation, and they think that there was more of a controlling mechanism. So you always hear about, signature things that you leave behind.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I'm sure we'll get more into the socket later. I have different thoughts about it, but I don't think it's crazy to consider Mike a potential suspect in that. I guess what I would wonder about is he did roofing throughout the summer months, and he tended to trap to fill in his finances during the winter where there wasn't as much work. And Stephen and Ruth are killed in August. So I'm not sure if he would have been out there setting traps or checking his traps during the summer as opposed to the winter. But again, it's certainly possible. Also, look, I don't know enough about Mike to judge him one way or another, but I did think it was interesting that his boss basically said that he was the type of guy who, was a reliable employee, but for lack of a better term, liked to party hard. Yeah. So there's a part of me that can't help but wonder, is it possible that he used to go out into these secluded wooded areas maybe and park and drink and, do whatever he was doing to get tuned up, and maybe these people wandered into his area and he wasn't having a good one that day? It's certainly possible.
Or perhaps the dog was even a trigger. Maybe the dog found an animal in the trap and then Mike, come upon it.
Oh, that's certainly possible. I guess the only problem I have with that is we know the dog was shot and killed, so I find it hard to believe that Steve would have still been in his sleeping bag after the shots were fired to kill the dog.
Yeah, and I do believe that they were all shot with 22, which Mike did carry with him, his father said. I mean, I know he's not the only person to have a 22, but...
Well, his father did say that he had a .22 pistol, but he also owned a ton of rifles and other firearms. So I guess it would be a matter of what did he have with him that day. If the .22 was always on him, then, certainly that's an interesting aspect of it. Myself, as someone who shoots a lot, I always find it really strange when somebody uses a .22 as the murder weapon, because a .22 caliber bullet, it'll kill you, but it's pretty small, and there have been a lot of people who have taken headshots with .22s and survived them. It always seems to me if I wanted to make sure someone was going to be gone, I'd at least use a 9mm.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you my thoughts on the Mike and Diana, and then I'll let you give yours. But according to the cold case detective, they're going to see if a DNA sample could be pulled from Reimer's teeth and see if it could be a match to the DNA found on the ligature that was used to bound Robertson's hands. The only thing I could think of if Mike was not involved is there was blood in the truck that would have been Diana's side. And they said normally when they would check the traps, Reimer would go check and Crystal and Diana would both stay in the truck. Well, I mean, maybe somebody come upon her right then when Mike was deeper in the woods. That might explain why they'd started to stab her perhaps in the truck and then she got out. And then I don't know if they would have found Mike deeper in the woods. But I mean, I can't get past the idea that Mike killed Diana. He'd physically assaulted her on more than one occasion. Some reports say he told her he could kill her and never get caught. And I just can't see a serial killer in the woods driving, Crystal to safety. And there was a couple of different examples of people that said they saw a truck matching his in the parking lot of that Kmart that day. So I'm still, lean towards Mike definitely killing Diana at least. Then... I mean, Mike can't, if you think about it, Mike couldn't resurface. If he did kill Diana, he couldn't resurface. He knew he would be the prime suspect. So I always thought that the most plausible thing, and the fact that he was found so many years later didn't make me think he wasn't guilty. It made me think even more so. Because if he did kill her, lost his temper and snapped and killed her, I could see him going deeper into the woods and killing himself.
It's certainly possible. It's not something that I think that you can rule out by any way, shape, or form. Even with discussions about, when they find the skull, police pretty much say, well, we didn't see any evidence on the skull to suggest a gunshot wound. But Some people, when they kill themselves with a gun, don't go through the mouth. Some of them put it to their chest and fire the shot right into their heart. That's not all that uncommon, especially for people who are somewhat cowardly, as one might describe a guy who's going to be a domestic abuser. So I don't think it's out of the question that he could have been the killer. I just have questions left over about that I can't find answers to.
Yeah.
Would he have killed Diana and then taken Crystal to where she's later found? Or does he take her there first and then he takes... Because to me, that's the way it would have to happen. If I kill this person, I'm not going to take a 45-minute drive, take a 45-minute drive back, and then off myself, a mile away. Why bother? If I'm going to off myself anyway, I might as well just do it where it's more convenient to do it. Why go all the way back to the woods and then not even be near her when you do it, to be a mile and a half away?
Yeah.
Everything I've read about Mike certainly seems to suggest that he wasn't the nicest guy in the world and probably not the kind of guy that you want your daughter being with. But I think there is a big leap between he was violent and he was a murderer. So I don't know. I really don't know when it comes to whether or not Mike committed this crime and then took his own life or something else went down. I guess one of the issues I have with something else going down is if Mike is checking his traps and Mike always has his gun with him, you would think that when he returns to the truck and he sees what has happened, he's going to shoot at somebody. And there doesn't seem to be any evidence that happened.
Yeah, and you would think he would carry a knife with him being a trapper, and that's supposed to be more of a crime of passion. 17 stab wounds Diana had.
Yeah, it's definitely a crime of passion. I would go so far as to say 17 stab wounds is beyond crime of passion to a degree. It's almost frenzied in a way. I would imagine those 17 stabs came really fast and really hard. So I could certainly understand the connection between stabbing and a personal or more connected crime, this not being so-called random. But on the other hand, we've had a lot of crimes throughout history in which someone got stabbed to death by someone that they had no knowledge of or connection to. Yeah. So it's kind of one of those cases where it's like, could you say that Mike did this? Yeah. Could you say that he was a victim too? Yeah. And there doesn't appear to be enough evidence to confirm it one way or the other.
Yeah, and a few other things that kind of didn't really lean towards Mike, and this was the detective interviewed on a podcast, said that Diana was found naked from the waist up, and her hands were bound behind her. I didn't really would think Mike would do that. I mean, if it was just he lost his temper, he snapped, he stabbed her. Yeah,
I mean, if she's topless at the moment, it seems like a strange time to lose your temper.
Yeah, I just don't see him doing that, and especially the ligatures. I mean, that makes you wonder, was that done before she was killed? And it doesn't appear she was stabbed in the truck because there was just some blood smears. And with 17 stab wounds, it would be terrible in the truck.
Yeah, if she had been stabbed in the truck, it would have been very obvious. There would have been pools of blood on the baseboard and everything.
But it makes me wonder if they started to stab her in the truck and then she got out. That's why there was just a few smears.
Either that or she started getting stabbed outside the truck, managed to pull the door open to try to get in for safety, leaned over the seat, dropped some blood on the seat, and got pulled back out.
Yeah, and part of me even wondered if Mike did kill Diana, was she in the truck when Crystal was brought into town? Then he drove back to the scene and, I mean, I don't know, disposed of her there.
Well, it's certainly possible. It would be really interesting to find out, because I haven't seen anything about it, and until you just said that, I hadn't thought about it. Do we know for certain that where Diana's body was found is, in fact, where she was killed?
Yeah, because you think it would be obvious around... I mean, I guess there was snow, but there would be so much blood around her.
Yeah, I mean, even with the snow, at a minimum, you would think that when they were searching around and stuff, the blood might have stood out a little bit more. I don't know. It's all very strange. The crime scene, for I don't have a better way to explain it, the crime scene doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where I can see it both ways. And I guess the thing would be, when it comes to the sock, I'm not sure why you would tie that around her neck. I mean, again, I haven't seen any reports. How tightly was it tied around her neck? Was it cutting off blood flow? All that kind of stuff. Don't really know. But it seems a strange thing to do after you've stabbed someone 17 times.
Yeah, and it was several knots, didn't it say? One report said.
I know that the only things that I read about the knot was that it was knotted, and that the murder scene, when it came to Ruth Cooper, had the same knots on the sock for her.
Yeah.
So it was clearly tied by the same hand, or it was tied with a type of knot that is extremely common. Because I don't know what type of knot was tied. I didn't find anything that really got into that. But I'll tell you right now, when it comes to me, I can tie pretty much one kind of knot, and it's a double knot, and that's it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to pull off any kind of complex nautical knots or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I'd be more interested if the information were out there to find out exactly what kind of knots are we talking about here.
I think it was someone that was comfortable in the woods, which of course could point to Mike, but could point to someone else as well.
Well, I definitely think it's somebody who's comfortable in the woods, because, say it wasn't Mike, it's somebody who's out in that area at that time. So it's obviously somebody who's out in the middle of nowhere and feels pretty comfortable with it. I've often wondered, Mike's got traps set out there. There's the possibility that he was about to stumble upon a poacher who was taken from his traps. Maybe that person didn't like it, or maybe Mike had poached from other people's traps. When you get into these guys in the woods dealing with the traps and the hunting, they get rather territorial about that stuff. It would be interesting to know whether or not Mike had ever mentioned to his father, who used to be a game warden, about anyone who might have threatened him or been in the area that he didn't get along with.
Yeah, and add to that, Mike did have a violent temper, at least towards Diana.
Yeah, so it's certainly possible that he sees someone or someone sees him, and they just, they get into some kind of an argument about it, whatever the case may be. It doesn't even necessarily have to have been that day. It's entirely possible that he had been, obviously he left his traps in these areas, he'd been there before. Someone might have told him on a prior occasion, don't come back here.
Yeah. Now,
at the same time, it could have just been Mike took her out there and something went wrong.
I guess I always felt like Mike and Diana were deeper in the woods, but do you know, were Steve and Ruth, were they deep in the woods, or was it more of a clearing? Because I know they were camping.
Interestingly, the site that they camped at, I couldn't find the specific location because it's only referred to as a remote campsite, and it doesn't come up on any of the mapping services. But there's several different campsites around the area where they were found, more major campsites. So I'm guessing they weren't necessarily at a designated campsite. I think they were probably at a clearing.
Yeah.
But his body was found in a gravel pit, but in the open. Her body was found at the end of a dead-end street, about 1.5 miles away.
And was there ever any mention whether, I guess maybe they didn't know whether Ruth was sexually assaulted? Because that's the first thing I think when they separate the woman from the man.
My understanding is due to decomp, they weren't able to determine whether or not that happened. My personal thought would be she probably was sexually assaulted. I don't know another reason to take her away from that area. I mean, then again, at the same time, if you've already tied this guy up and cut his throat, I don't think you have to worry about him doing anything, but maybe you don't want to be around that while it's happening, or it freaks you out, or she's screaming. There's a million different things that could have happened there. But she's found about 1.5 miles away at the end of, I think it's South 8th Avenue. And there's a clearing at the end of it because it's a dead end, and her skull is found in that clearing, and then about 50 feet further into the tree line, the rest of her body is found.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, too, since Diana was found partially nude, if they did a test to see if she had been raped as well. Maybe they're just keeping that to themselves.
It would be really interesting to know. I feel that same way about the first case that we had discussed that I don't think's linked, but with Ed and Kim, with Billy Ray Ballard, his prior arrests and convictions were for abducting, torturing, and sexually assaulting women.
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that wonders, and I don't think they could because of decomp again, but I'd be very curious, was Kim sexually assaulted?
Yeah.
It's very strange. I mean, you've got these, it's not exactly the right term, but you're finding couples in rural locations. You're separating the men from the women. It very much does seem to imply that you're probably sexually assaulting the women and disposing of the men. The socks would verify that to me, at least, in that the socks are tied around the women's necks, not the men's. That tells me that the women are the primary targets.
Yeah. And if they're
the part of this killer's fantasy that he wants to fulfill and live out, the guys are just in the way.
Yeah, I agree.
But, look, a couple being murdered in a remote location is not a new story. It's been going on forever. It's a very common way that people are killed. You look back, at the Zodiac Killer. That's basically what he did. And, at least in this case, if you think that, even if it was Mike who did both crimes, or you think it was somebody else, you've got a crime that goes from gunshots to stabbings, which is quite an escalation. You go from a sort of impersonal, I'm going to kill you from a distance crime to a I am up in your face, very intimate personal crime, which is fascinating to me, which is what sort of makes me wonder if the cases are 100% linked, because it almost feels like the first case has more to do with killing and just getting it over with, whereas when it comes to at least Mike and Diana, or at least in terms of Diana, this was not a one and done, let's get it over quickly.
Yeah, and there was also a few mentions that maybe Diana was starting to date again. So I wonder if they were really trying to get back together, or Mike, it was kind of a ruse where Mike, kind of lured her there that day. Well, let's get, because they were going to look for a Christmas tree as well as check the traps. Right. Or was it just, if he did kill her, was it just, he just snapped and they had an argument and... you wouldn't think he thought Crystal would plan Crystal to be there while he would kill Diana.
Yeah, I don't think you bring her along if that's your intention. So if Mike did kill Diana, I don't think it was premeditated. But I've also considered the possibility, for the impression I got, at least from some of the interviews I read with Diana's sister and what she said on Unsolved Mysteries, I sort of got the impression that maybe both of them kind of dated around a little bit. This wasn't exactly like a tight, we're with each other relationship, which kind of led me to wonder, is it possible, since, again, if the theory is accurate that the crime occurs south and then Crystal's driven north to Spanaway, well, that's right along the way to Tacoma and the suburbs. So there's a part of me that wonders, could this have been someone that knew Diana and wanted to be with her, and then she told him, I'm getting back together with so-and-so, and this guy's like hell you are.
Yeah.
So maybe you go out there with the intention of, I'm going to kill these two, and then all of a sudden Crystal pops up in the backseat of the truck and she was asleep and you didn't know she was there, and now it's like, what do I do with this kid? Even though it sounds completely crazy and abnormal, serial killers and killers in general don't think like us, and a lot of them do not consider children viable targets.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting where they dropped her off at, because it really wasn't the closest place they could have taken her to safety.
Yeah, it's almost like they took her someplace where they knew she would be found and she would be okay, rather than, how many gas stations are between the crime scene and Spanaway? Probably quite a few. You could have dropped her at one of those, but for whatever reason, this person goes out of their way to make sure she is in a place where she's guaranteed to be found and probably guaranteed to be safe. You take her to a Kmart, I believe it was. Yeah, she's probably going to be found. They're going to call the police and they're going to start figuring out what's going on here. That could lend credence to your idea that Mike did this, because, a father would probably want his daughter to be okay. But it could also be somebody else had done this and just viewed the child as an innocent bystander who, at her age, can't identify me, so why do I need to do anything to her?
Yeah. Also, if you notice, Diana's body there was no attempt to hide her body, because it was right behind a pickup truck. Of course it would have been found.
Yeah, that's another interesting aspect of the case. In all reality, you stabbed this woman 17 times. It appears that whoever did this stabbed her 17 times and then left her exactly where she was when that happened. I know we don't know for certain if it's where she's found is exactly the crime scene. But let's face it, you leave this body not far from a bright red truck in the middle of the woods. Not only are you not trying to hide it, you're trying to make sure it is found.
Yeah, and so what do you make of the envelope with "I love you, Diana" written on it?
Oh man, I'm so torn on the envelope. I don't think it has anything to do with the crime at all.
Really?
No, I don't think it's linked to the crime at all. To me, the envelope is, I don't know, for lack of a better term, I guess like a red herring.
Yeah.
I think, they have a back and forth relationship. They, split up, they get back together. He's an abusive prick, they get back together. I think it's entirely possible that "I love you, Diana" written on the outside of that envelope could have been something that he gave her at a previous time that maybe had a letter in it, or "Oh my God, I miss you so much, I'm so sorry," whatever the bullshit is that these people say.
Yeah.
I think that's entirely possible, and that it's just something that was in his truck at the time. Now, a killer outside of Mike could have went in that truck. From the blood, it seems that somebody went in there when there was blood around. Maybe they saw that, threw that up on the dashboard. I don't know. I know the family says that it looks like Mike's handwriting, but the FBI says they couldn't match it. So it's sort of up in the air for me. But I don't think the envelope's as important as it's made out to be, because for all we know, that envelope that says "I love you, Diana" could have been sitting on that guy's dashboard for 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's more just chilling. And I had thought about that too. Maybe he'd given it to her prior after an argument, but it's just weird that it's written on a manila envelope, not like a greeting card. So that made me wonder, was it some kind of remorse after he killed her? But yeah, it's such an odd, thing in this case.
It's not a piece of evidence that you can beat your head against the wall trying to figure it out all day, but at the end of the day, I don't think it lends all that much helpful information in terms of figuring out what the hell happened here. I mean, he could have written "I love you, Diana" on that envelope. It could have had a letter that she read. It could have had a picture that he gave her. He could have been sitting in his truck and she was at the window of her apartment or house, and he wrote that and held it up to show her because she won't let him in. Who knows? I mean, we know one of the domestic violence situations he was involved him kicking her door down.
Yeah, and then women that are abused and then they're love bombed by the perpetrator, that's not uncommon either. They're sorry after they're done.
Well, they say they are.
They said, and until they do it again, they're sorry.
Yeah. They're sorry that you got upset about it, and that they're going to have to do it again in another week.
Yeah.
It's one of those messed up situations where, look, it's very easy to look at this case, and I kind of think this is what happened early on, which is probably why we don't have as much information as we should. It's very easy. If I told this story to a complete stranger, hey, there was this guy, and he had a daughter with this woman, and he was a physically abusive and probably verbally abusive prick, and he would beat her up, and then they would separate, and then they would get back together, and then the cycle would continue, and guess what? She was found dead in the woods. What do you think happened? Everyone's going to say, well, he probably killed her. And I think that's the way cops looked at it at the time. I don't necessarily blame them for that, but I think if a little more legwork had been done, we might have been able to figure out with more certainty what exactly went on here. Because I know a lot of people, when Mike's skull was found, turned around and go, oh, well, clearly he's innocent. I don't know that finding his skull suggests that he was innocent in any way whatsoever.
No.
But it certainly raises the possibility that, hey, maybe this was a double homicide and not a murder-suicide.
Yeah, plus he wasn't found very far away from Diana.
What's that?
He wasn't found very far away from Diana's body. It was just took, many years later.
Right. But it's also the same case with the previous murders of Ruth and Steven, where she's found about the same distance away, about 1.5 miles.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where you look at these two cases and you can line up all the similarities, which might make you think, oh, these cases were clearly carried out by the same perpetrator. But then you line up all the differences, and it's like, maybe they weren't. So it's kind of all over the place in terms of, I guess what you really need to do is figure out, if it's possible, with certainty, are these cases linked? The sock makes me think they're linked. Whether that means Mike is the serial killer or he copycatted it or something, I don't know. To me, a lot of people have made the argument, oh, well, maybe Mike killed Diana, and then he tied the sock around her neck because he knew about the previous murder, but I don't know why you're trying to cover up a murder if you're going to go a mile away and off yourself, too. That doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think the mindset after killing your girlfriend, there'd be remorse. You wouldn't think you'd be thinking clearly enough to do all that.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Not to mention, I'd like to know, because I haven't seen anything about it, how much blood was on the sock tied around Diana's neck. Was it enough blood to suggest that she was stabbed while it was around her neck? Or was it enough blood to suggest that the killer, after killing her, had bloody hands? Or was there no blood on it?
Yeah, that's true.
That's another one of those things where we don't have enough information. One interesting thing I thought of, and I don't know, it's just out of left field. These murders all took place in a wooded area where hunting and trapping were common.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me feels like the sock around the neck is almost like a hunter tagging his prey. I got you, and then you tie the sock on, almost like how you might tie a flag to a tree to designate which direction you're going in the woods and all this stuff. I don't know. It screams to me, at least the sock around the neck kind of says some kind of outdoorsy kind of thing. And that obviously points somewhat towards Mike, but I also think it's possible that it could have... Mike's not the only trapper and or hunter that was operating in that area.
Yeah. It could be a calling card.
It's interesting to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could be a signature, certainly. But I guess the question would be, what happened to that signature after Mike and Diana? Because you don't see it again.
Yeah, and you wonder if in that area, or maybe even anywhere, the killer could be traveling, if there were any more murders with the sock tied around their neck. I mean, you'd certainly have heard of murders where that's happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's, several different murders I can think of where it happened, but I'm also curious about the socks themselves. Do they think that this killer came into the woods and had socks with him with the full intention of, well, I'm going to kill somebody today, and I'm going to wrap this sock around their neck? Or did this person commit the crime and then take his shoe off and take his sock off and tie it around their neck?
Yeah.
The sock is a fascinating angle of this case to me, and I can't quite wrap my head around why it would be used, where it would come from. And frankly, if I'm a serial killer, I really don't want to go out of my way to show you that my cases are linked. I'd rather you investigate them as independent homicides and give myself a better chance to get away with it. I know it's a silly reference, but it's like in Home Alone, where at the end they catch the wet bandits and he says, thanks for leaving the water running. Now we know each and every house that you hit. Why leave behind a signature that confirms, yes, these are my crimes, so if you catch me for one, you've got me for all?
Yeah. And plus, they went from, these socks are identical, to them saying, well, testing would show they're not from the same batch. I mean, that doesn't mean the same person didn't have them both, but...
Yeah, the sock is a very confusing aspect of this case. Look, I don't mean to sound grim about it or whatever. There's a ton of unsolved murders in this country alone. And the vast, vast majority of them don't get enough attention. And there's a part of me that feels like with this case, without those socks tied around their necks, you probably never hear of these cases.
Yeah.
So in a way, for whatever reason it was done, it is the sock that keeps these cases going today. That's a key piece of fascinating evidence that people can't get over, to the point that they're called the tube sock killings.
Yeah.
Which, if I'm a serial killer, that's a terrible nickname.
Yeah. But we will probably never know what actually happened that day. We're just left to speculate and make sure that the victims in these cases are not forgotten. I guess that's why cases like these continue to be talked about and debated, because there is no clear-cut answer or scenario that makes total sense, which is what makes it a true mystery. Steven, I am so glad to be able to have you on the podcast, and your podcast is fantastic. So everyone check out his Trace Evidence podcast. And Steven,
thank you so much for having me on. I had a really good time researching the case, and I've really enjoyed discussing it with you.
And I hope to have you on here again someday. So
I'm sure we can make that happen.
Okay, talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
On the Washed Away podcast, there is an interview with Detective Beale, and he talks about something interesting about the morning of the disappearance. He said the family of 3 is said to have started their trip at 7 a.m., but just an hour later, at 8 a.m., Mike and Crystal apparently arrive at Mike's father's house. Diana didn't appear to be with them. Lloyd Reimer offers to make breakfast for the two, but Mike declines, saying that they have to go. Detective Beale then said that shortly after that, Crystal was dropped off at Kmart. I had also found 2 newspaper accounts detailing a truck matching Reimer's description at the Kmart parking lot that day. In the Tacoma News-Tribune, dated February 19, 1986, it stated that private investigators learned that a vehicle believed to be Reimer's red Plymouth Arrow pickup truck was seen in the store's parking lot the evening the girl was found. A Salvation Army bell ringer at the Kmart in Spanaway told P.I. Mel Hoover that she saw the missing truck between 4 and 5 p.m. on December 12th, the day of the disappearance. She said when she came back from a break, the truck was gone. I realized Detective Beale says that Reimer possibly brought Crystal to the store that morning, but it seems an eyewitness account of the truck and when Crystal was actually discovered at Kmart that it was later in the day. Unless Reimer had run some errands with his young daughter and had stopped by there earlier in the day, for whatever reason, before bringing her back there and leaving her. So to sum it up, it appears that we will never truly know what happened that day. Could these cases be connected, and is Mike Reimer a victim or the perpetrator of one or more of these crimes? Theories and speculation are mainly all we have to work with to search for clarity in this tragic case, but I don't want to lose sight of the 6 people who lost their lives in 1985. However elusive it may be, there is always hope that we can get the answers in these tragic crimes, and we can know one day what really happened during the terror in the trees. That concludes my podcast on Diana Robertson and Mike Reimer. Once again, a special thanks to my friend Steven Pacheco for his help in breaking this case down. Remember to check out his amazingly well-researched podcast, if you haven't, titled Trace Evidence. You can find my podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I try to release a new episode every 2 weeks. You can find all of my articles, as well as links to my latest podcasts, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I also have social media pages under that name on X, Facebook, and Instagram. I have a Patreon channel that you should check out where I post exclusive content concerning obscure missing persons cases you may have never heard of. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.